everyone, and welcome to this week's video. Now, I know I said last week that every video I do this month will not be Inktober related, but please forgive me that I had to kill two birds with one stone for this week's video, as I seem to have caught a little bit of conflu after the convention last weekend. So this year I'm officially following the Inktober prompt list by adding a fun little twist and doing them all witches. This year as well, I also decided that I would be painting with inks instead of doing a simple line work. I thought I'd do line work and paint with acrylic inks and some drawing inks as well. I've learned a lot while doing this process, so I thought it'd be really fun to share my experience with you all. So last week I shared a test piece that I did for Inktober. Now, painting with inks isn't exactly a foreign concept for me. I have done in the past a few videos where I have painted with inks, and I know that you have watercolour inks, which I do have a handful of, but this year I really wanted to use mainly drawing inks, acrylic inks and the Winsor & Newton drawing inks as well. So today's prompt is bait. Now, the first thing I could think of was someone fishing. Not exactly an original concept, but I really wanted to add a sort of like kind of peaceful element to it, of the scenery around there, as well as a twist of a horror element. So this year for all my Inktober pieces I've essentially been doing witches, but I want to add like a small horror element to them, whether or not that's through the description that I tell the stories or through the way that the illustration is depicted. And I figured that since all these colours are very saturated and very colourful, even if you heavily water them down, the colours still end up being very, very saturated. I figured it'd be a really fun idea to have these sort of like juxtapositions against each other. So the first thing I'm using here is I'm using the Daily Rowney acrylic ink. This ink is waterproof, so this is the ink that I can build up on top of. So this is what I tend to use for my lining. I've got a few different colours now. I've got the brown, I've got blue, I've got purple, and I've also got a pink as well. I would love to branch out and get a few more at some point, but they are like £5 a pot, and that's quite expensive. I actually got half of these in a sale bin at one point, and I was like, hell yeah. And I also have a white one as well. I also end up using the Winsor & Newton ink, as well as some unbranded ink as well. I'm a massive fan of using dip pens, so I thought that would be really perfect for the line work. I end up also using a little bit of the feather dip pen that I've got as well. And it's pretty much all just building up layers and going from there. I find that with inks, if you are painting with them, they end up being quite shiny, and what I mean by this is that they dry with this sort of like layer of shine, so a little bit later on when it gets to the actual colouring stage, there is parts that is going to be quite difficult to see the full illustration, but I will show it off a full part of the illustration later on so that you can see exactly how the finished product looks. But of course, with having a lighting rig on top where you guys can actually clearly see that what I'm drawing instead of the image being quite dull, you are going to get a little bit of glare, unfortunately, and this is just how ink dries. It's just how drawing ink dries. Acrylic ink does behave very differently from drawing ink, so it's kind of trying to try out the different ones, trying out how watering down them works, and going and trying through different techniques. And I think that's what's really fun about Inktober. I think that we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to do fantastic illustrations, and I actually spent more time on this illustration than I have done on the previous 2 days. This sketchbook that I've got here, it's a sea white watercolour sketchbook, so it does hold the water extremely well, so I can layer and layer and layer on top as much as I want. It's actually a cold press watercolour book, which is perfect for doing the layering technique. but it only has 20 pages. So I figured to make life a little bit easier on myself, instead of doing massive illustrations every single day, I was going to do half of the page and do small illustrations. Kind of like last year when I did Inktober, I only did them postcard size. I'm trying to stick to a smaller size. But since I was killing two birds with one stone, I figured that I would spend a little bit longer. And this entire piece took about 2.5 hours to do. And that's from sketching to inking to the final product. Overall, this is around about 2.5 hours sped up overall, and that doesn't include drying times. If you add drying times, it's probably about 4 hours total, because you have to wait for layers to dry in between. But ink does dry fairly quickly in comparison to watercolors. It's depending on how many layers you put on as well. So one of the things I really wanted to convey was I wanted this really calm point on top with this sort of like, not massively horror, but kind of like there's something lurking under the water underneath. So I have this idea that she has like a glowing fish hook, and that's what attracts the monster from the deep while she's fishing. It's nothing too deep, nothing too over the top with a horror element. I just kind of wanted to have something that's a little bit different there, something different than what I would normally do. And I think this is something that I'm going to try with every single one that I'm going to go from there. This is where you're going to really struggle to actually see the top half of this piece in particular, because I ended up laying a lot of the watercolors on top of each other. Well, I'll say watercolors, the inks on top of each other, which creates that like sort of sheen. In particularly at the top, this is a lot of Winsor & Newton ink, which when you're layering, it does dry with a slight sheen to it, so it is going to create that effect. You could probably hear in my voice is going after Comic-Con. We had a really good time, but I am a little bit poorly, so apologies that this week's video wasn't something that wasn't Inktober, but I figured, hey, it was fun. The one thing I really wanted to do was to have like a very gloomy layer at the bottom here, because the colours are so bright and because they are so bold and beautiful. I tried to desaturate them, and what you can do is add a little bit of black ink, and what this does is this darkens the tone of the colour. You only need to add tiniest amount, but this will darken the colour palette and give that desaturated tone that I'm after for the bottom, as well as like really watering down certain colours to get the layers, desired layers that I wanted as well. It's was really fun doing this piece. Like I said, this is the longest that I've spent on any of my Inktober pieces so far this year. I'm having a lot of fun with it. I've been watching horror films over the last week. I'm a massive horror film fan. I'm a horror TV show fan, so if there's any recommendations, please let me know down below. I haven't seen a program that's given me a good scare in a while. It's been a long time. I really like horror films. They're a lot of fun to watch. I am very excited for the spooky season. I have some fun illustration stuff coming up. I really want to do a illustration series with Marie and Prickles, which I think would be really fun to do on this channel, as well as I'm working on the Plumpkin comic, so I'll probably be sharing a little bit of that, as well as I've got some crafty fun projects on the way, so I'll probably be sharing some of that progress as well. I also really want to do a fun video with character design and taking an inanimate object, say like a pumpkin, and how you could really give that give it character, and I thought it'd be fun to do a talk on character design about that. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below, whether or not that's the videos that you are interested in. I've just been having a lot of fun experimenting lately, and this year has been the year of experimentation for me, and I've really enjoyed a lot of things that I've done simply because it's been different than what I normally would do. I'm playing with gouache, I'm playing with acrylics, I'm playing with modelling clay. It's all stuff that I've never really done before, and I just think it's fun to sometimes step outside of your box and do something a little bit different. So you know that little voice in your head that tells you you've gone too far with an illustration and you've decided to over detail stuff? this is the part where I should have told myself to stop. I've added far too much detail on the bottom half in comparison to the top half. So your eye does really draw to the bottom of the illustration a lot more, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it makes the top part just seem unnecessary in comparison. I should have just had it where you could see the witch's feet dangling off the edge of the water, off the pier while she's fishing, and that would have made a more powerful illustration than the overall thing. But you know, you live and you learn. You've got to try different techniques, and whether or not it works for you, you know, you never know. It's fun. This is what experimenting is for. You have to try and learn from your mistakes and grow from them. This is what I really enjoy Inktober for. I love challenge bumps. I love challenge bumps that force me to use a medium that, yes, I'm familiar with, but I could improve on as well. I think there should be a few more foreground elements to this piece to really make the piece seem a lot more cozy. I tried to add it in the bottom right, but it's not really effective. I could have really done without that, but if I really wanted to frame the illustration nicely, I should have started that slightly higher up and then brought it round towards the left, and that would have made that framing seem a little bit more fun in that illustration. It would have added a better framing effect. But you know, you live and you learn, you understand from your mistakes, and I think that's what's really important with illustration, like coming to accept the mistakes that we made. The things I do like about this, I really love the colour palette I went with. I really love the cold tones that have the juxtaposition with the warm tones, and my favourite part, the peeling. This part is so much fun. I've been using washi tape for the borders and to create these really clean lines, and surprisingly it's worked really, really well so far. If you saw the previous two illustrations, you can see that it's got nice clean lines, and that's all thanks to the power of washi tape. And the fantastic thing is about washi tape is if you can get it, we've got them in the pound shops here in the UK, and it's not too expensive, and I find that it works a lot better than masking tape a lot of the time. And the problem I have with masking tape is, for me, it always seems to tear paper, but with washi tape it doesn't, and I think that's just because, you know, it's a little less sticky. But I'm really happy with this illustration, and I hope that this suits the theme bait. And if you guys are taking part in Inktober, feel free to tag and share your work with me. I'm always so excited to see what people do. And this is the last final looks of the overall illustration. I really love the bold colours, as I said, and I'm really happy with how this came out. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Be sure to follow me on social medias if you want to see all my Inktober's. I'm posting them on Instagram and on Twitter daily if you are interested. But I hope you guys have found this video somewhat helpful or fun to watch. If you're new, maybe subscribe to see more content, and have a lovely day. As always, folks, stay creative.